My first question to you has to be about President Trump not conceding even now. The Electoral College has confirmed the Biden victory a few weeks ago. Pretty much everyone has accepted it. The transition process is going on, but President Trump has yet to concede. What kind of a message do you think he's trying to send? And his legal battles that he has going on in some states, how valid are those?
Well, let me answer those in reverse order. I think the courts at several different levels, including the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court, have been pretty conclusive and, in fact, for the most part, unanimous in shooting down President Trump's attempts to challenge a historic election with virtually none, if any, problems or challenges, and a historic election with perhaps the largest level or highest level of voter turnout that this country has seen this century. So the courts, as well as you mentioned, the Electoral College, have spoken quite resoundingly and unanimously to underline the validity and correct way that the election proceeded, and the, again, historic number of voters who decided to cast their votes for Joe Biden, the highest number of votes ever received by a presidential candidate were awarded to Joe Biden, roughly 75 million votes. That's a lot of votes. And I think the president continues to refuse to acknowledge that because I think, as we have heard from various political pundits as well as his family, the president finds it extremely hard to admit that he has ever lost. And the very strong message that was sent by the outcome of the election on November 3rd this year was that Donald Trump lost.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when you're looking at President Trump, Suman, what kind of a legacy do you think he is leaving behind? Because we're very close to January 20th. So what do you
We sure
have to say?
are.
Yeah.
I think the president is leaving a legacy of historic corruption, malfeasance, political cronyism, and monumental inefficiency and inability to have government do its job by making sure that the needs of the nation's residents are met.
Yes, for sure. You know, when we're talking about President Trump, I have to now talk to you about President-elect Joe Biden, because a lot is happening when we're looking at his transition process. How are you looking at this ongoing transition process of the Biden-Harris administration? Do you think they're doing everything right so far?
Well, I think that President-elect Biden is being very cautious and is very aware of the reality that while he won the election, while he secured a historic number of votes, again, the most ever given or awarded to a presidential candidate, he still is going to be taking the office of president in an incredibly politically polarized nation. And I believe that is choosing him to be very careful and to welcome well-known faces into his administration. Again, not everybody who he has decided to appoint or nominate in his administration are well-known, but we are seeing many individuals who were extremely qualified, and involved in government at several different levels, who are being tapped again for President-elect Biden's cabinet, as well as other high-level positions. It is an incredibly diverse slate, of course, and I welcome that. I also think that there is a difference between diversity, representation, and accountability. And I think that there is much to be done on the part of the incoming administration to undo the damage, neglect, and devastation that this country has experienced over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and they will be taking over, you know, this country when COVID-19 is seeing one of its worst surges ever. Who do you think in this cabinet of nominations that President-elect Biden has brought would be difficult to confirm in the Senate?
That's a very good question. I think that many individuals, including myself, consistently try to understand the current workings of the Senate under the leadership of Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, most of whose tenure as Majority Leader has been focused on obstructing nominations, ranging from Supreme Court justice nominees to cabinet secretaries. So I think that all bets are off in many different ways. I think that Majority Leader McConnell, as well as GOP members of the Senate, have signaled quite strongly that they are opposed to many nominees, including Neera Tanden, as well as including their opposition to or evincing their opposition to Janet Yellen, perhaps one of the most qualified individuals to be nominated for Secretary of Treasury. And again, I think we're seeing here yet another record of the Senate in particular under Leader McConnell's leadership, putting partisan ideology and allegiance over competence. And I think at this moment, the nation needs competence when it comes to its cabinet secretaries more than anything else.
And what happens if some of these names are not confirmed, Suman?
I think the nation will continue to be in the throes of yet more partisan polarization at a time when the nation needs action, perhaps more than any other time in the last century. People are going to continue to suffer. Lives will continue to be lost. The economy will continue to sputter for most individuals. And there will continue to be a dereliction of duty. Things will only continue to get worse if the nation continues to experience the paralysis and intransigence and refusal to do really anything that we have seen over the last 4 years under the Trump administration.
Do you see President-elect Joe Biden, and I'm saying this, after the January 5th elections in Georgia, if we have a Republican majority, do you see Joe Biden having a difficult time with the Senate to get bills passed?
I think there's no question he'll have a difficult time. I think it's wonderful and helpful that President-elect Biden has personal relationships with many members of the Senate. But I think the Senate has shown us, even in their refusal to pass a COVID-19 relief bill, which was passed by the House earlier this summer in May. The Senate has shown us in its current composition and based upon its current leadership that, again, it is willing to put partisan ideology over helping the country recover from one of the worst pandemics that it has ever experienced. So again, the Senate leadership has chosen to put partisan political ideology over getting people back to work and saving lives. And I hope that that will shift if and during President-elect Biden's administration. But I think we have to be very concerned about the same pattern continuing, particularly under Leader McConnell's leadership.
You had just mentioned the COVID-19 relief package. I'd like to have a discussion on it because just Sunday night, President Trump finally signed the bill so that, we can start expanding benefits to people that need it the most. My question to you is, it's a $900 billion, COVID-19 relief package. We're seeing issues of food insecurity, unemployment, evictions, health crisis, and so much more. Is it enough?
Definitely not. It's only the beginning. I think it's a welcome stopgap measure to, again, help get some vaccines out the door and distributed to help plug a bit of the hole that so many individuals across the country are experiencing with respect to being able to put food on the table and have a roof over their heads. I think economists as well as legislators across the board, as well as the American people, have indicated for several months that it is far from enough and that we will need government to step in and help protect individuals and communities at a far greater level.
While we're talking about this relief package, the stimulus aid that's coming out of it is a huge part of discussion this week. What is your take on President Trump trying to increase the stimulus checks to $2,000 from $600? What do you think he's trying to perhaps portray?
I think that many people would love to know what he's trying to portray. I'll just remind you that $2,000 stimulus check offer or proposal was part of the House package that was passed earlier this summer. It was core to the negotiations within the House and with the current Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, and it was shut down by Republican leadership, both in the House as well as the Senate. So I think while we can't understand or really fathom the current president's motivations behind scuttling that bill, I do think that it was simply an opportunity for him to put a wrench in the works and, again, ensure that intransigence and not doing enough to support the American people is one of his core legacies.
Do you see this bill being passed by the Congress, Suman, this increase to $2,000?
I very much hope so. That $600 in some cases, or that $300 in some cases per individual or per household, is very little. And yet it is crucial aid, as you mentioned, at a time when so many individuals are out of work and the coronavirus is continuing to ravage communities across the country, not in blue states, not in red states, but really across the United States. And so I think many individuals, regardless of their political affiliation, are well aware that it is incumbent upon government to do their job by helping people.
Yeah, that's so true. And, here's to hoping that we do get a higher stimulus check if, those talks are in there. A lot of Americans need help really, really bad right now. I'd like to now discuss a little bit more about the president-elect and all that's going on in his transition process. His first 100 days agenda that he presented to the country says that it's focused on COVID-19 economic relief, vaccine distribution, and getting kids back safely into school. What's your take on him having this mandate, and how important do you think it is for him to control COVID-19 surge after he gets inaugurated?
I think it's critical for the president-elect and for the future president to actually address the COVID-19 epidemic. This nation has seen hundreds of thousands of lives lost due to the refusal of President Trump, as well as this administration, to truly address the gravity of this epidemic, from refusing to wear masks in public, to denying the severity of the virus for months in public, despite admittances to the contrary in private, and finally, for their refusal to approve the large-scale, long-term aid for hospitals, for states and local governments, for vaccine distributors. The list goes on, but I think the refusal of the Trump administration to do anything, frankly, on a large scale to address the COVID-19 epidemic means that all of that responsibility in even greater levels will continue to fall on President-elect Biden.
Yeah, definitely. In his mandate, what I thought was very interesting is getting kids back into school safely is a part of his 100 days agenda. I'd like to understand why getting kids back into school has become a political issue. I'm saying that because we still don't know how to safely open schools, how to ensure kids are not transmitting the disease to each other. But in politics, we keep on hearing about this. Why is that?
I think similar to wearing a mask or mask mandates, getting kids in school or keeping them out of school has become incredibly politically polarized. And you have some folks who refuse to admit the severity of the issue. You have others who are not really looking at the data, particularly what epidemiologists across the country as well as the world have noticed and noted is that for small children, at least, being in school has not been shown to be a transmitter of COVID-19. And so at the same time, you have their parents and their communities experiencing real hardship due to the impact of online learning or the lack thereof with respect to so many communities. How do you do online learning in this country if you lack access to the internet?
Right.
And I think that in turn has contributed to so many poor and working class students of color and poor and working class students, period, falling way behind months into a pandemic at a time where they are essentially being deprived of one of their core civil rights, which is a right to an education. And so, I don't think the issue needs to be politically polarized at all. I think that we need to continue to follow the science and follow the guidance of epidemiologists and public health experts.
Yes, definitely. This brings me to the fact that, this pandemic has definitely brought in disproportionately, impact to certain communities versus the others. The Black and brown communities have definitely faced a lot in terms of the ramifications of the economic and healthcare crisis of COVID-19. How have you sort of looked at it? And when you look at communities of color or immigrant communities, how have you looked at their journey this year, dealing with both aspects of the economic crisis and the healthcare crisis? And, what are some of their concerns according to you?
I think it's been a devastating year for Black, brown, immigrant, and working class communities. I think at the same time that hundreds of thousands of individuals who come from communities that have felt the impact of structural racism for hundreds of years, at the same time that they continue to live that reality, they are losing their jobs. There has been non-existent, for the most part, support from the federal government, let alone state and local governments, and their communities are decimated. So I think it has been a devastating year for so many different communities, and I think only is serving to underscore the extent to which COVID-19 is reinforcing the ways that structural racism is manifesting in our society.
Do you think, or do you believe that immigrant rights were perhaps impacted this year, threatened, or ignored?
I think they were all of the above. I think they were impacted. I think they continued to be threatened, especially when you had a president who was referring to Asian immigrants as vehicles for the virus. And when you also looked at the unconscionable way that so many immigrant communities were absolutely categorically excluded from any type of aid. If you are undocumented and you are an essential worker and you are helping to keep your city, your community, your locality going, how is it possible that the federal government's aid does not extend to you? Again, I think it's a moment of yet another unfair exchange of this country wanting and needing the support and labor and heart of so many immigrant communities and being unwilling to return that support to them.
And a lot of these immigrant communities don't even have proper access of where they're living to resources that other communities may have. This brings me to the fact that you had just mentioned the word systemic racism. We have had a discussion on it before as well. My question to you is, where do you see that discussion going in 2021? And the incoming administration, how much responsibility do they have to make sure there is less racism, discrimination, and hate crime in the nation?
I think it is incumbent upon the incoming administration to continue to acknowledge just how much needs to be done with respect to addressing structural or systemic racism. I don't think it is going to be solved in the next 4 years. I don't think it's something that government alone can do, but it is something that government needs to signal its willingness to lead on. And I think that the incoming administration has much to focus on with respect to its actions rather than just its words. And, there is much to undo with respect to addressing structural racism. And we're going to see what that looks like with respect to the policies, legislation, and executive orders that the new administration will be able to enact and secure.
How have you seen, the talks of systemic racism, the protests we saw, everything, all the emotions that came out this year? How do you see it impact brown voices this year? Do you think the brown communities came out enough to support these causes?
I think that brown communities came out at a far greater level. I think it's never going to be enough. I think that we need to continue to manifest our commitment among brown communities and leaders to truly digging deep and addressing and manifesting our support to addressing, in particular, anti-Blackness within our own communities, as well as anti-Blackness within the societies in which we live. And I think also, finally, the ways in which so many South Asian immigrants in particular have been pitted against Black communities for centuries by the powers that be, and just how much damage and division that has stoked, and how we really need to continue to chart a new path forward, not just with, our words, but really with our actions.
With the issue of racism, Suman, especially the conversation of police reform and policy work in that has definitely come out. My question to you is, you work a lot in policy. What kind of policy do we really need to curb police brutality in this nation? What kind of education do we need to give to the law enforcement system?
Well, I think we certainly need to continue to educate law enforcement. We also need to continue to increase the accountability that law enforcement often does not experience at the hands of federal policymakers, let alone state and local policymakers. What kind of a message does it send when the very individuals in our communities who are supposed to keep us safe are the ones who are making several communities and individuals in those communities less safe? So I think we need much stronger enforcement and oversight on the part of the Department of Justice, which has been missing in action on this issue really for the last 4 years. I think we need to revisit agreements called consent decrees, which is where the federal Department of Justice looks at the data with respect to police brutality and complaints across local and state police departments, and in the past has clamped down on police departments that are reporting or promulgating far too many incidents of violence. And in the past, these consent decrees have been ways for the federal government at the Department of Justice to say to local law enforcement, we're keeping an eye on you. We expect you to keep your community safe. And we also expect you to make sure that you are not, in fact, increasing violence with impunity in your community. So I think that's just one example, right? I think we need far more oversight and support for state and local law enforcement leaders who want to do the right thing. I think we need far deeper partnerships between community-based organizations and state, local, and federal law enforcement. And I think we need to have far greater accountability for the violence that has already been occurring.
Yeah, definitely. I think accountability is a huge thing that the nation just keeps on asking for when we're talking about the issue of police brutality. I just have a few questions left for you here, Suman. I'd like to know, what issues do you think are of utmost importance while we're going into 2021? Especially in policy work, what are you focused on?
There's so many issues, right? And I think part of the challenge is that policy advocates and organizers across the country are really confronting this question of, how do we undo so much of the damage that has been manifesting in our communities while still charting a path forward? I think clearly addressing the coronavirus, not just with respect to vaccine distribution, but also with respect to support for healthcare institutions and for local governments that are doing their best to navigate a tragedy of this proportions, is critical. The minute we have a vaccine, we all know that not everybody will have access to that vaccine, nor should everybody have access to that vaccine. But I think the devil will be in the details about ensuring that we're able to, in as safe and equitable a way as possible, protect as many individuals as possible, and in fact all residents of this country, with access to a vaccine, but also with access to other ways that we know from epidemiologists that we need to continue to keep ourselves safe. So I think vaccine distribution is critical. I think economic support and aid is also critical.
Yes.
And I think figuring out how to keep individuals in our communities safe while still addressing their basic needs is going to be yet another core priority.
When you're looking at these issues, Suman, and you're looking at the incoming administration, how do you think they're going to handle this? And also, what are some of your biggest concerns when you're looking at this incoming administration?
I think that, what we have seen so far is the Biden transition team and the incoming Biden administration want to be as careful as possible about, and I think they're well aware of the partisan deadlock and challenges that await them when it comes to actually enacting legislation and getting it passed. So I think they are very focused on trying to make sure that they can get things done and that they can actually succeed in getting some relief to individuals. I think that I'm worried about the dance or the dialogue between asking for all that we should at this moment and all that our communities need, and deciding that a little bit less is enough. And I think that question of what is enough is critical for this administration. And I think it becomes even more critical knowing just how much obstruction and inaction await an incoming Biden administration, in particular on behalf of Republicans, both in the House as well as in the Senate. So I think that dance of figuring out how to actually get relief really immediately to people while advancing policies that will change the nature of what Americans have to contend with in the future is critical. And there's a very long list: climate change, immigration relief and assistance, reforming the economy, addressing worker rights. The list goes on and on and on. And I think all of the points on that list are so important. And so prioritization is going to be really key in figuring out how to develop some momentum.
Yeah, definitely. They are inheriting a lot on January 20th, and we just hope for the best for them. I just have two more questions left for you. I have to ask you about the Georgia Senate race right now. It's huge. Georgia became a swing state in this election, not anticipated by anybody. How are you looking at the Senate race right now, and who do you think are the most important voters when you're looking at this race?
Again, I'm going to answer that in reverse order. I think every voter in Georgia is important for the Senate race. Each and every voter. I think we learned that in the November general election. I think that lesson has continued to be learned and repeated on the part of really anyone and everyone who is living in Georgia and organizing in Georgia. And clearly there is so much at stake. I mean, control of the Senate lies in the balance with respect to the outcome of the Georgia Senate election. And I think both parties on both sides of the partisan aisle have understood that they need to get their people out. And I hope that the experience of the November general election in Georgia will continue to be the same with respect to the special election, which again means historic voter turnout, very few problems with respect to voting at the polls. And I think what we've already seen is more than 1 million votes cast early in Georgia. And I really hope that that pattern continues.
Yes, definitely. The voter engagement is so important. We hope everyone in Georgia goes out and votes. And finally, my last question to you, Suman, is you've been known to advocate for the most vulnerable voices, to do a lot of policy work as well. What are you focused on in this incoming year, and how do you hope to advocate for the most vulnerable people?
I I think the first piece is to actually listen to those who are most vulnerable and hear from them about what is most important to them. We know on an immediate level that so many of the most vulnerable have been devastated by the 1-2 punch, if you will, of the coronavirus pandemic and the devastation it wrought on our economy. And so I think making sure that we can get people back to work, that we can get them aid, that we can make sure that their basic needs from housing to healthcare are met, could not be more critical. I think continuing to pursue people's individual needs and immediate needs is, just as important as continuing to advocate for ways that the system needs to change. I think if the coronavirus showed us anything this year, it reinforced the ways that the system does not work for so many people who live in our country. And so I think asking really deep questions about equity and about access across the board, whether it's the immigration system, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's, access to a good job, whether it's health and safety, whether it's how individuals are impacted by law enforcement in their communities. Those are all conversations that we need to continue having and that we need to not give up on.
Yeah, that's so true. We must not give up because we have to make the communities and the system a little better, hopefully. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we need to fight hard for our communities because clearly we haven't gotten enough.
Yeah, definitely. We got to advocate for those voices. Thank you so much for your time here on ITV Go, Suman.